Welcome to the One Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. Mosiah, Chapter 7. Chapter Overview. A group of men leave Zarahemla to search for some people who left Zarahemla at some point to try to go back to their ancestral lands. This chapter was actually pretty confusing to me. It took me a while to figure it out because it's so unclear in the Book of Mormon, which is supposedly very clear and delights in clarity. In verse 1, we are told that approximately 3 years after Mosiah became king, so approximately 119 BC, or year 479 since Lehi left Jerusalem, he was desirous to know concerning the people who went up to the land of Lehi Nephi, or in the city of Lehi Nephi, for his people had heard nothing from them from the time they left the land of Zarahemla, therefore they wearied him with their teasings. This land of Lehi Nephi seems to pop up with no warning, and it almost sounds like it's a new place that we've never heard of before. But eventually in verse 7, we're told it's the land of Nephi, so apparently it's the same place where Nephi built the first temple in America. Why it was here called Lehi Nephi and not just Nephi, as everywhere else in the Book of Mormon up to this point, is anybody's guess. My money is that Joseph Smith just misspoke or misremembered it, then caught himself just in time, and then continued to call it Lehi Nephi instead of just Nephi, intermittently, so as not to raise suspicions. Who are these people who left the land of Zarahemla and went up to dwell in the land of Lehi Nephi? In this chapter we're not told, and I could be wrong, but it appears that this is referring to the considerable number of people at the end of the book of Omni, including Amaleki's brother, who were desirous to possess the land of their inheritance, of whom nothing is ever heard from again, at least in Amaleki's lifetime, just before he hands over the plates of Nephi, Jacob, etc., to King Benjamin. In verse 2, we're told that 16 strong men were given permission to go to this land, with verse 3 saying that one of them, called Ammon, being a descendant of Zarahemla, and he was also their leader. Why would someone with no connection to the land of Nephi, since he's a descendant of Zarahemla, not Lehi, end up being in the expedition, much less being their leader? Here's another blank spot or plot hole. You'd think that if Mosiah's people wanted to inquire after their relatives, these are the ones who went back to possess the land of their inheritance, after all, this would mean they would have to be Nephites. It would be only Nephites who went on the expedition, but that's not the case. Verses 4 through 5 recount that this group of men wandered for 40 days in the wilderness until they came to a hill which is north of the land of Shiloh, and there they pitched their tents. Apparently this hill overlooks the land of Nephi because verse 6 tells us Ammon took 3 of his brethren, and their names were Amaleki, Helam, and Hem, and sends them down into the land of Nephi. We're not given any reason to think that these are not Ammon's literal siblings, so then this would make at least a minimum of 4 out of the 16 men having no relation whatsoever to the residents of Nephi. The plot hole widens. The next several verses tell us that these men ran into the king's guard, were put in prison, then after 2 days were brought before the king to answer questions. In verse 9, the king introduces himself as Limhi, or Limhi, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, the son of Noah, who was the son of Zeniff, who came up out of the land of Zarahemla to inherit this land, which was the land of their fathers. Then in verses 10 and 11, he demands to know why the men came so close to the walls of the city with the king himself right there. Ammon answers in verses 12 through 13 to say that he is a descendant of Zarahemla. I guess Zarahemla is actually a person's name, and the city was named after their founder, like the land of Nephi was named after the man Nephi. I'm guessing here, because usually Zarahemla is said to be the city. Now it's the man's name, I guess. Then Ammon says that he and his men have come up out of the land of Zarahemla to inquire concerning our brethren whom Zeniff brought up out of that land. If these people here are indeed the people who left Zarahemla at the end of Omni, which is logical but not necessarily an accurate understanding, considering how disjointed and unclear the Book of Mormon is in many points, then this raises a problem. Because Omni says that the men wanted to possess the land of their inheritance, which means that these men would have to be Nephites, not Zarahemlites. But Ammon, who is a descendant of Zarahemla, calls the people who left his brethren, even though around the time that these people left Zarahemla, the Zarahemlites were supposedly so far removed from the Nephites so as to speak different languages. This makes no sense. Going back to the story, Limhi is happy with Ammon's answer and says that the Lamanites have put them in bondage with heavy taxes, but that he expects our brethren will deliver us out of bondage or out of the hands of the Lamanites, and promises that they will be the slaves to their deliverers. Quote, "For it is better that we be slaves to the Nephites than to pay tributes to the king of the Lamanites." Again, color me confused. Who are these Nephites who are going to deliver Limhi and his people? Remember that the people of Zarahemla are, by and large, not Nephites, and only a relatively small portion are descended from Nephi. But even then, they should be called Zarahemlites and not Nephites. If anything, Limhi should call himself and his people Nephites, and Ammon and his people Zarahemlites. But I digress. At this point in the story, Limhi sets Ammon and his brothers free, calls his people to come together tomorrow, at which point he tells them that they will soon be freed from the Lamanites and reminds them of the promises of God. Verse 21 has him say that Zeniff, remember his grandfather, and the one who had led the expedition from Zarahemla, had been made king over the people, but had been deceived into making a bad treaty with King Laman, who, like the land of Lehi, Nephi, and Zeniff, just pops into existence from nowhere, and ends up subjugating all the people to them, so that the Lamanites take half of all they own and produce on threat of death. And apparently this happened because they were wicked, and God allowed them to be so persecuted, though it didn't help that according to verse 25, they fought and even killed each other from time to time. As an example of this wickedness, he recalls that his ancestors even killed a prophet of the Lord who, among other things, said unto them that Christ was the God, the Father of all things. I have to break in here into the middle of the narration to point out that this is contrary to modern LDS thought and belief, which views Heavenly Father and not Christ as the Father of all things. This is yet another example of modalism in the Book of Mormon. Then the chapter ends with Limhi saying, "It's no small wonder that such evil had befallen them, considering their wickedness," but then encourages his people to turn to God, who will deliver them out of bondage.